This is Major Scales, and we're on page 43 of the textbook. And I'd just like to point out that for me and for the purposes of this class, discussing tetrachords I find is not that helpful, so I just omit it. If you look at my book, I've just scratched it out. So yeah, I just find it to be not that helpful in talking about major scales. But we'll go through and learn how major scales are constructed. We've talked about this in class already, which is good. We've kind of set the groundwork. What they are trying to show us is how far apart the notes are in a major scale. So the word major is something that we apply to this particular grouping of notes, and we've already talked about how scales are just like families. It's a collection of notes, and they just have a relationship to each other in terms of intervals. So if you look at the textbook and we start on the first note, C, the distance between the notes follows a pattern. So from C to D, the distance is a whole step. The distance from D to E is a whole step. And then E to F is a half step. From F to G is a whole step, another whole step, another whole step, and the last one is a half step. So we have whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So that's a pattern of whole steps and half steps. And anytime you apply that pattern to a beginning note, it will always give you a major scale. So I don't know if it's helpful. Let's just say that I started on a different pitch, like an E flat. And if I follow that same pattern of whole steps and half steps, I will also get a major scale. Has that same flavor, right? So it doesn't matter where you start, you always end up with that major scale sound. So it's really just a relationship of the intervals between the notes and following that pattern. So exercise number 2 on page 43, write a C major scale, add the scale degrees under each note and indicate where the whole steps and the half steps are. That'd be a good exercise for you to do, just to write out the scale from C to C. You can write the scale degrees like they did here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then maybe you could do it below or you could do it above. I'd probably do it above. And just put a little like a W for a whole step, H for a half step, and indicate where the intervals occur. And then down here, they're kind of having you do that in a different way, but this is kind of the main one. So again, that pattern is the thing that you kind of want to memorize, I guess. It's funny because when we learn instruments as musicians, we don't really think of it necessarily in that way. A lot of times we sort of think about how it relates to the keys on our instrument. You know, if you play a saxophone or what valve you're going to press. And it's much more related to playing a piece of music, which in my opinion, maybe is a better way to go. But if you have even the paper piano that I gave you in class, you can see those intervals on the paper piano. You can't hear them on a paper piano, but you can see them, and you can see the patterns that form when you follow that sequence. So that's technically how you create a major scale starting on any note on the keyboard. Just follow that pattern, okay? Memorize that. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. If we turn the page to 44, they give us 2 other scales, which they're calling the sharp scales. So what they're referring to is the fact that if I start this process of whole steps and half steps on the note G, and I observe whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. You notice that I had to move from here to here. I had to make the F into an F sharp in order to maintain that pattern of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So I must play an F sharp in order to create a G scale, a G major scale. So because it's using a sharp note, we're calling it a sharp key. And the second one they give you is D major. Same thing. Whole, whole, F sharp, half, whole, 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 half. So if you start on a D and follow that same pattern, we end up with two sharps. So D is also considered to be a sharp key because we have to alter notes in the scale, the note names, in order to observe the whole, whole, half sequence. So in the exercises below, they basically got you constructing those scales, and I'll do one on my whiteboard, maybe for the G major. And we'll have to add an accidental in order to make the written notes observe or follow what we hear on the piano. So here's the pattern. Bring my mic over here. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And when you look at it on the staff and on the piano especially, that's a whole step, that's fine. Whole step, that's fine. B to C, yes. Half step, right? So that's cool. C to D, whole step, no problem. D to E, yes. Now look at E to F. If I play that on the piano, that's a half step. But the interval that we want is a whole step. So when we go from E to F, we have to sharp the F in order to give us that whole step. So I'm going to put in a sharp sign. So now I have F sharp, and then F sharp to G is in fact a half step, so it works out at the end. And if you wrote the note names below, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, sharp, and G. Make sense? So you can construct the one that's on D major just to practice writing out the scales with sharp signs. Turn the page to 45. Here it says the flat keys, F and B major. So they're doing the same thing we did with the sharp ones. We're starting with the two simplest ones. And F major, if you start here on an F and observe the whole, whole, half pattern, you notice that I play this note right here. F, G, A. B is too far, so we got to go B flat. So we've lowered B to B flat in order to make the pattern work. So that requires one flat, which is B flat. So we call it a flat key. Same thing. Look at B flat major. If I start here on B flat, it's my first note. Observe the pattern. Here's the half step. So we had to take E, lower it to an E flat in order to observe this half step. There's a whole step, half step, whole, whole, whole. Last interval is a half step. And similar to those rhythmic exercises where I said you should always end up in the right spot, when you're doing major scales, you should end up in the right spot. So that doesn't work. Obviously, if it's B flat major, you don't want to end up on a B natural. Half step. So we end up again where we started, which is on B flat. So practice writing these out, writing the accidentals both on the notes on the staff as well as when you name the note down below, including the flat sign, so that we know, like in the key of F, we're playing a B flat, or in the key of B flat, we have B flat, C, D, E flat, F, G, A, B flat.